So now let's see about air masses. Air mass means a quantity of air which is having similar property of temperature and humidity throughout its entire stretches. So if I am saying in this room we are having air mass, it means that anywhere I go, the property of the air over there, it will be same. Property in the sense it's about temperature and humidity. So air mass, it means it is having constant property of temperature and humidity. Okay. Now next thing is its formation. For the formation of air mass, now a homogeneous region should be there. Now what do you mean by homogeneous region? Homogeneous region means like a region having like same property throughout the entire structures. It means like the weather there is not dynamic in nature, and we are not having frequent changes in weather. Okay. So homogeneous region should be there for the formation of air mass. Now the regions like a vast ocean or a large continental area which is covered with ice cap or frozen ice can result in the formation of air mass. Fine. The next thing is large scale subsidence. So in the previous session we discussed about the atmospheric pressure belts, right? So there in subtropical high pressure belt and on those regions we are having subsidence of air taking place from the upper layer troposphere towards the Earth's surface. So this subsidence takes place, we will be having stable atmospheric condition. The weather, it will not be dynamic. Okay. So that's why this large scale subsidence which is necessary for the formation of air mass. So three things which you should remember: its constant property of temperature and humidity, then homogeneous region, then large scale subsidence. Now regarding your prelims examination, since UPSC has already asked a question from this topic for your mains examination, you can expect a question for your prelims. Okay. And in that perspective, we should understand the classification of air mass. Okay. How the air mass is classified, and what are the different source regions which will act as source regions for different air masses. Okay. So regarding the classification, I already told you they are having constant property of humidity and constant property of temperature. So based on humidity, it's classified as continental and maritime. So continental means the amount of atmospheric moisture will be less, okay, and they will be forming over continental regions. Now maritime means this air mass will be forming over the oceans, meaning that it will be having more atmospheric moisture content will be there. So based on humidity, it is classified as continental and maritime. Now based on temperature, it's divided into tropical, polar and Arctic. Tropical will be warm, polar will be cold, and Arctic will be extremely cold. Okay. So based on temperature, three classifications: the tropical air mass, polar air mass and Arctic air mass. And these can combine together to form different air masses. Suppose if I am saying continental Arctic, it means that continental means we are not having presence of atmospheric moisture is less. So this source region which can act the source region for this type of air mass, it will be like the land masses which are seen in the Arctic and Antarctic region, which is covered with ice cap regions. Okay. The next type of air mass is continental polar air mass. Now continental means atmospheric moisture is less, polar means temperature is again less. Okay. So the regions which can act as source regions for this kind of air mass, they are Siberia, Greenland and Canada. Okay. So in those regions, like we will be having frozen land will be there, okay, which will be covered with ice and all, so that the temperature or the air mass forming over those regions will be devoid of atmospheric moisture and temperature will be less. Okay. So next kind of air mass is maritime polar air mass. Maritime polar means maritime we are having more atmospheric moisture, and polar the temperature is less. So the source regions will be the polar seas or polar oceans. So the source regions for the maritime polar air mass, it will be like North Pacific or North Atlantic, Bering Sea, as well as like Norwegian seas. Those regions or the polar sea, it will act as the source regions for the maritime polar air mass. The ocean should not be frozen, then only it can act as source region for the maritime polar air mass. Fine. So next category is, or next type of air mass is continental tropic. Now continental atmospheric moisture is less, tropic temperature is very high. So the source region for this kind of air mass is low latitude desert or Sahara. Okay. Now why I specified it as only Sahara? Now, in order for the formation of this air mass, the region or the source region, it should be very vast. Even in the case of Sahara, like only this kind of air mass will form there only during summertime. Okay, so the source region, it should be vast enough for the formation of air masses. Now, if I am saying like the Deccan Plateau regions or North Indian plains, those regions won't act as source regions for the air mass of large scale quantities. Okay, so you can expect a pair type of question from this topic. On one side, you will be given like a different classification of air mass will be there, and you will be asked to find out whether they are matched correctly with their source regions. Okay, and if any small kind of plain regions like Deccan Plateau or like North Indian plain, which is given as the source region of continental tropic, they will not act as the source regions for that kind of air mass, because the region should be homogeneous, it should be vast, and it should not be dynamic. Okay, if you are having frequent weather changes, the air mass cannot attain its property. Okay, air mass is attaining its property of constant temperature and humidity from lying over that surface for a longer time. Okay, so if you are having frequent weather change, that property will be lost. The next is maritime tropic. Maritime, atmospheric moisture is more, tropic means the temperature is more. Okay, so this kind of air mass, the source regions are like the subtropical oceans, in the sense like Pacific Ocean, Atlantic or Indian Ocean. The vast quantity of or the large quantity of air mass is formed over these regions, which is called as maritime tropic. Okay, so generally these are the classifications of air masses. Another term related with this concept is polar front. Polar front, or first of all, front means it's a boundary region between two contrasting kind of air masses. Okay, boundary region between two contrasting kind of air masses. So polar front means the cold air mass which is coming from the polar regions having boundary with the warm air which is coming from the tropical regions. Okay, so this polar front generally means cold air coming from the polar regions which will be devoid of atmospheric moisture and which will be low in temperature, and they will be sharing a boundary with the warm air which is coming from the maritime tropic regions, okay, which are high in atmospheric moisture and which are very high in like temperature also. So regarding this module or this topic, which you should remember is what are the regions which can act as source regions for different kinds of air masses. Okay.